Welcome, fellow commissioners, and of course to the members of the public who are joining us at our regular meeting of the County of San Diego's Independent Redistricting Commission. Let's begin, as we always do, with our clerk, Andrew Potter, for information about today's meeting. Andrew.
Thank you, Chair Boehm. Any members of the public who wish to provide oral testimony during today's meeting, please review the instructions that are posted on the redistricting website at www.sandiegocounty.gov/redistricting. We ask that individuals who wish to speak submit an online request to speak form in advance for planning purposes. However, all requests to speak from the public made at today's meeting will be honored. In addition, agendas, minutes, and supporting materials for the Commission's meetings are posted on the redistricting website. Meeting agendas are translated into Spanish, Vietnamese, Chinese, Filipino, Arabic, Japanese, Korean, Laotian, as required by law. Thank you.
Good. We'll move on then to item 2 of the roll call. Andrew, can you please call the roll?
Happy to, thank you. Before I call the roll, I would like to note for the record that all commissioners are participating via teleconference. As such, all votes will be handled by a roll call vote. I'll ask the commissioners to please unmute your microphone and say here or present, and we'll go alphabetical order for the roll call. And then, as we did in the past, we'll have a random order for the votes for agenda items. Start with Chair Boehm.
Here.
Commissioner Brown.
Here.
Commissioner Katarina.
Here.
Commissioner Chen. Vice Chair Diaz.
Here.
Commissioner Dostal.
Here.
Commissioner Garcia.
Here.
Commissioner Hanson.
Here.
Commissioner Inman.
Here.
Commissioner Krugliak.
Here.
Commissioner Larson.
Here.
Commissioner Pons.
Here.
Commissioner Russ.
Here.
Commissioner Serban.
I am present.
Thank you.
Very good. So we'll move on to item 3. Thank you again, Andrew. The next item being non-agenda public communication speakers. This is an opportunity for the public to address the commission on subject matters within the commission's jurisdiction, but not on an item on today's agenda. The only action the commission may take is a referral to staff. Andrew, do we have any members of the public who wish to speak on non-agenda items?
Thank you, Chair. Yes, we have one request to speak. I'd like to invite Jean Ericat to address the commission. I'll also note that for any members of the public requesting to speak at today's meeting, if you want to speak under this non-agenda public comment item, please raise your hand in the Zoom panel. We'd be happy to recognize you. Speakers will have 2 minutes to address the commission, and as I indicated, we'll begin with Janine Ericat. And I would ask the speakers to please state their name for the audio record. Thank you.
Hi, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Janine Ericat. I'm a community organizer at the Partnership for Advancement of New Americans. First, I wanted to thank you all for your continuous consideration and engagement with public input. I know myself and our community really appreciates it. I just want to uplift that PANA is a research, public policy, and community organizing hub dedicating to advancing the full economic, social, civic inclusion of refugees. We work primarily with African, Arab, Middle Eastern, Muslim, and South Asian communities across the county. In the past year, PANA launched the Refugee and Immigrant Census Hub with over 15 partners, and we were able to contact over 40,000 people across the county to engage in census in their preferred language. I wanted to uplift the email that I sent to the IRC last week to offer again to present to the IRC on best practices for language access and outreach to our communities. Again, those are the African, Arab, Middle Eastern, Muslim, and South Asian communities. We previously presented to the State Commission on such topics and would be more than happy to present on how to engage refugee and immigrant communities in our county. Again, I'd be more than happy to remain on the line if you have any questions about what I can do on what topics I could present on, what you'd like me to address. Lastly, I wanted to thank you all for providing the agenda and the required languages by law and the opportunity to offer interpretation. I did want to flag that for today's meeting, the non-English agendas are not up. And it would be helpful also in the non-English language agendas to provide instructions to request translation in those languages. didn't see those on the Arabic one. So if you could all, I just again want to thank you all for your continued dedication, great public service to the county, and encourage you all to reach out to other local community-based organizations that work across the county's diverse communities on how to best engage their communities. Thank you all, and I look forward to today's meeting.
Thank you. And that appears to complete non-agenda public communication this afternoon.
Very good. Thank you for that. And I will ask staff to take a look at this agenda in particular for today's meeting, but in keeping with all of our usual guidance on being engaged and communicative. Moving on, the next item is approval of the minutes from the January 28th, 2021 meeting. We'll need a motion to approve, then a second, and then any discussion. Do I have a motion to approve the minutes? Commissioner Larson. Thank you. Do we have a second?
Second.
Sorry.
Who got first? We'll take Commissioner Brown. Very good. Is there any discussion of the minutes?
Yes.
Vice Chair Diaz.
I just wanted to note that I noticed the word subcommittee being used interchangeably. And I really want to be careful with the difference of ad hoc committee versus a standing committee. So I wasn't sure if that was brought up earlier. It was on page, let's see, when that item came up, actually. I think it was on page 2. Sorry I didn't catch this earlier, but it says presented by the ad hoc subcommittee and clarified by the flowchart slide. So I wasn't sure if we should just strike, if it should just be ad hoc committee or.
Sure. So I'm going to ask the clerk of the board for his guidance, but on the original item that was presented at this meeting, this was the language that was used, and the subsequent staff report for today's, we did clarify standing versus ad hoc. But you're correct, we were using those, we were saying interchangeably in the original one. So I don't know if council or clerk of the board want to weigh in on that one.
The only thing I would add, Barbara, is that what's important is ad hoc versus standing, committee versus subcommittee. Those terms can kind of be used interchangeably. So I think ad hoc committee or subcommittee, either one is accurate.
I guess my question is, just to clarify, is the actual document that was processed in the communication, the item at that meeting used that language? The language being used at today's is been clarified. So the minutes are reflecting what was actually said. And so that I guess that's my question, if that makes sense.
Yeah, that makes sense. Thank you.
Is that okay?
Okay.
Okay.
So we'll leave that as is. Any other comments, questions? Very good. Seeing that. Andrew, could you please call the roll for a vote?
Thank you. Be happy to. Commissioner Dustall,
Aye.
Commissioner Russ, Commissioner Brown,
Aye.
Commissioner Larson, Chair Bain,
Aye.
Commissioner Garcia,
Aye.
Commissioner Servin, Commissioner Servin, we didn't catch.
Aye.
Thank you. Commissioner Hanson,
Aye.
Vice Chair Diaz,
Aye.
Commissioner Inman, Commissioner Katerina,
Aye.
Commissioner Krugliak, Commissioner Pons,
Aye.
and Commissioner Chen. That motion passes unanimously with all commissioners who are present voting aye.
Very good. Thank you very much, Andrew. We'll now move on to item 5, our next opportunity for training. I'd like to acknowledge the continuing interest of all commissioners in such training and look forward to further discussion and invitations for training as we move forward. We'll talk more about that, I think, later under a separate agenda item. Today's training, though, will be led by IRC Council Marguerite Leone and Kathy, I hope I'm getting that right, Fang, thank you, who's the National Redistricting Director for Common Cause. After the presentation, we'll hear any public comments, and then commissioners will have a chance to ask questions and clarify matters. Just to be clear, this is an informational item with no action for the commission. I'll turn to Marguerite to get us started, but with a warm welcome to her and Ms. Fang for joining us today. Thanks.
Thank you, Chair Boehm. Could we have the PowerPoint? Wonderful. Thank you very much. We're calling a series of presentations for the Commission, Redistricting 101. And we hope in several meetings to provide an overview of the redistricting process and the responsibilities of your commission. On this presentation, you will hear a number of concepts, some perhaps for the first time, and we're not expecting to go into all of them today, but we'll have subsequent meetings on all of the details about redistricting. Next slide. Today, our main presenter is going to be Kathy Fang. Kathy has led Common Cause's work, challenging partisan and incumbent gerrymandering through litigation, state-based organizing around ballot initiatives, and legislation, and creating new platforms for community-based redistricting. And to get right down to the nitty-gritty, Kathy is the architect of California's Citizen Redistricting Commission, and she led the multi-year effort to study, write, and pass two initiatives, which resulted in Propositions 11 and 20, and the commission that is at work today simultaneously with our commission to effectuate the intent for citizen-based redistricting. And before, this has been at the heart of Kathy's work for many, many years. And before joining Common Cause, she headed up the voting rights and anti-discrimination unit at the Asian Pacific American Legal Center. I am so pleased over the years to have worked with Kathy and to have her join me today. Our presentation today is going to be basic. What is redistricting and why is it important? Of course, from an incumbent's point of view, we understand that. But what about from community and community health? Kathy will give an overview on how to create a transparent and inclusive process. And then what I would like to do is close by introducing you to the difference between the 2011 process and the 2021 process. And then as a final slide, which isn't on the outline today, just give you an overview of where we are with the census data. So with that introduction, I would like to have Kathy take over the microphone.
Great.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Marguerite. And it's a pleasure to meet the new San Diego Independent Redistricting Commission for the county. I want to just start by saying you deserve our thanks, our applause. This is not going to necessarily be an easy process. You're giving up a lot of time, and you're going to be making some really hard decisions coming up. So this is not an attempt to try to scare you away, but to just recognize that you are truly heroes for our democracy, and you're setting the way for the rest of the country. So thank you. So let's get started. Some of you, let me just make sure that I'm still connected. Can you all hear me? Give me a hand. Okay. my Zoom on a regular basis does not behave. And so I never know if it's going to disappear for the next second. Okay. So some of you may have joined us for a local redistricting training about a week ago. And so I'm going to apologize. You are now going to be even more expert because you will have seen this presentation 2 times, but please feel free. This is an opportunity to ask questions beyond what I presented. Next slide. Okay, so we're going to talk very high overview of what is redistricting, why it's so important to try to include community voices so that we can improve community health, and why you are really in the driver's seat to try to create a transparent and inclusive redistricting process. Next slide. So every 10 years, we take a census of each person who lives in the United States. That attempt to try to count every single person goes right back to the beginning of our founding days as this country really wanted to try to create something that was different from the places that people came from before, right? Where representation was not determined based on the number of people. You certainly didn't have the right to vote in or vote out somebody. And the idea that we might be giving people that ability to shape who represents us in government, to make huge policy decisions, was revolutionary, as you all know from American history or civics lessons 101. So here we have our imaginary city. It counts up to 20 people. And so what you do is you take a jurisdiction. So the county of San Diego would be an example. You would take the total population and you would divide it by the number of districts that you're trying to draw, right? So here in our city of 20 people, you have 4 districts. You divide that evenly into 5 people per district. And you then draw the lines to make it an equal number of people. That fundamental process is what we call trying to make equipopulous districts. You may come across that. It certainly is written into our state constitution, and it is fundamental to the concept of one person, one vote, right? You're taking total population, you are dividing it by the number of districts, you are coming up with an ideal number that you're shooting for of total population within each district that will be equal to the next door district. Okay, next slide. So obviously over time, people will move and people will give birth, people pass away. We certainly saw a lot of that movement over this last decade as people were looking for cheaper places to live. So they might have been moving inland, right? Or as people are building up families. Some people are looking for good school districts. And so they're moving to those places and they're bringing in a lot of kids, right? So in our imaginary city, then over time, what used to be an equal number of people in each district gets distorted, right? And so that's why, next slide, every 10 years, we take another census and we say, okay, our city now has 24 people instead of 20. We divide it by 4. And you end up redrawing those lines so that each district will have now 6 people. Okay. Sorry, I think that the original slides had some graphics that moved around, but you get the general idea. And that's what fundamentally what we're trying to do, right? The first principle that drives redistricting is draw districts that have the same number of people. Next slide. Now, why do we think about redistricting as a potential to either protect minority voting rights or take it away? In this, sorry, there's a graphic that goes along with this, but we imagine that this city of 20 people, let's say that after we do the census, we realize that there is a minority community that lives in the city center. And if you were to simply draw perfectly compact lines, squares. Sometimes people say, why can't we just let a computer draw it? You may end up drawing that minority community into 4 different districts, right? And what will end up happening is that each one of those districts of 4 people will have one person who is of minority background, and that minority community, while it might want to come together to draw or to vote for a candidate of their choice, no longer has that ability because they are a minority within each district. Next slide. So one of the things that we think about is we take testimony from people. And sometimes that's about understanding where those neighborhoods are, where those communities are, and also where there are protected minorities under the Voting Rights Act. So here, if you take that testimony and you're sort of paying attention to where people say, okay, this is my neighborhood, please don't draw a line through it, you can draw that district in a very different way where that community then has the ability, right, to elect a candidate of their choice. Now, when we talk about, there are two phrases that I just used, the Voting Rights Act and communities of interest. You will get a much deeper dive from future speakers on both of those topics. But what I want to leave you with is these are two different concepts. The Voting Rights Act is a federal law, and it is one that has a formula that you're looking at that says if you can meet these three prongs, then you must draw a majority minority district. The other concept that I just mentioned, communities of interest, is it's less formulaic and it's much more based on community participation to tell you, as a self-identified matter, where are we? And that term, community of interest, could apply to ethnic minorities, to language minorities, but it could also apply to a neighborhood, right? A group of people who live along a port. And they derive their livelihood, but also experience the environmental impact of living close to that port. So you could imagine a community sort of defining itself along a lot of different lines, but the key thing is that they share interests that would be best represented by a single person who is elected to office. Okay, next slide. All right, some of you have seen this slide before, so I know you know the answer, but let's play the game. Guess where this photo is from. And if you didn't know the answer, where would you think that this was? And you can use the chat if you want to. I know that when I usually ask this question, people are saying Minnesota, Canada, Michigan, places that are cold. This is actually, yes, in Los Angeles. This is the community of Watts. And in 2003, it was hit by a freak hailstorm that dumped several feet of snow and hail onto a community that clearly was not ready for that kind of precipitation. It crushed 150 houses and buildings, and you can imagine just trying to dig out of it, trying to rebuild those houses, trying to reestablish an economy must have been crushing for people. The residents of that area, next slide, went to their elected legislators and they were told that they could not help them with federal emergency aid or with other kinds of assistance because that community was not fully in their district. Next slide. What they realized was that time and time again, if they went to District 39 to try to get assistance from that congressional member, the congressional staff would say, no, that's actually, you're really much more in another district, try District 37. They'd go to 37 and they were told that they were really in District 35. And the reason why, the community that is shaded in green is the community of Watts. They were actually cut into 3 different districts, right? Next slide. That division happened not only at the congressional level, but also at the state Senate and the state assembly level. This is a small neighborhood, right? And when a neighborhood that is already struggling with challenges that have to do with young people growing up in at-risk situations, a high level of unemployment, struggling with economic investment, then gets hit by a natural disaster like that, and they find out that they cannot receive assistance because they can't seem to get anybody's attention. That fundamentally tells you why it is so important to listen to the communities as we're drawing those lines, right? In 2008, as Marguerite mentioned, we pushed very hard for a reform, a huge reform in California. And at the time, I'm going to give San Diego a lot of credit because the city of San Diego actually was one of our models. The city of San Diego actually had a commission of regular people and proved that it could be done. And we went around the state and we said, you know, it's not right that the legislature draws its own lines. It's not right that communities are not listened to. They need to have an ability to actually speak to their representatives on this most fundamental matter, which is how our elections should be run. And the people of California thankfully agreed and voted to pass Proposition 11. Next slide. That created a citizens commission. Oh, sorry. This is actually testimony that comes from a congressional staffer who remembers being in the room when the community of Watts came to that office. And he remembers how heartbreaking it was to have to tell those constituents that they really couldn't help them. And his words were, this would never have happened if Watts had all belonged to one district. I should mention that, you know, the story of Watts is one that was repeated up and down the state. So by all means, you can find examples of that in San Diego, in Los Angeles, you know, up and down the state of communities that were divided by the legislature because they wanted to come up with a sweetheart deal to protect each incumbent. Next slide. So where I was going with the story was that a commission was formed in 2008. And ultimately, when they started meeting, when they were chosen and they started meeting in 2011, they heard the community of Watts. They redrew the lines. The lines are in green. And you can see how, A, the lines are a lot more logical, but also they heard that story and they made sure that the redraw would keep all of Watts wholly within a single district. Next slide. So California really has sparked a redistricting revolution. Starting with the amazing city of San Diego, and then that energy building throughout the state. And now we have cities and counties throughout the state that have adopted some type of redistricting process that is much more open, that is much more in the hands of regular people, that is committed to having an inclusive process of listening. These are the many cities and counties that join you in trying to push for an independent commission. And let me just say that this revolution has not only been energetic within California, but it's taken hold across the country. So in 2018, there were 5 states that adopted redistricting reforms. And there are many other jurisdictions. I just heard about Bloomington, Indiana, the city of Bloomington adopting an independent citizens redistricting commission. The city of Austin lifted the language from our California Constitution and said, us too, right? Syracuse in New York is doing it. So know that you are part of an amazing citizen revolution, but also that many jurisdictions are looking at our cities and our counties to see how is this done? How do we do this the right way? And when it's all said and done, many people will tap you to say, tell your story so that we understand how we can recreate that. So not to put too much pressure, but there is so much that we can do to prove to people that if you get engaged in your government, if you participate, that your voice will really be heard, because there are people just like you who are listening and taking on this important role of drawing those districts. Next slide. So I want to talk about 3 different levels of responsibility. And I like to start with this inner blue circle that's called centering community input. If you think about it, this is sort of fundamentally different from how we usually think about redistricting, which is normally the way that redistricting is described is, and how it happens is that the legislature will oftentimes hire a consultant or 2. That consultant will get an office outside of the legislature or outside of the city council or outside of county board of supervisors and start drawing maps. They're not listening to testimony. They're not paying attention to what people are saying. What they're doing is they're doing the bidding of who hired them. And that will either be incumbents or it'll be party leaders, but it certainly won't be because somebody made a really great presentation during a hearing and presented why their community should be held whole. So your job is to flip that script and to say, okay, what we're going to start with is listening. We're going to listen to where communities are, where neighborhoods are, and really understand how maybe changing a line here and there is going to make a difference for people. Okay. Second circle is thinking about creating a transparent and inclusive process, and I'll go into that a little bit more in detail. And when you do all of that, you will ultimately create maps that are far more equitable and representative and give people an ability to have choices in the ballot when they go to vote. Next slide. So how can you create a transparent and inclusive process? I mean, a lot of this is going to be, I think, very much driven by your insight and your ingenuity. And I say that because some of the most innovative ideas come from our citizen commissioners, ones that even the crafters of these laws would never have imagined, right? So I want to put you in the driver's seat to really own this process and to say, what can we do to make this as inclusive and transparent as possible? There are new state laws that require a certain number of hearings and that, sort of require a certain level of transparency. But that's just the bare minimum, right? That's just sort of a starting off point. And you will have some speakers who will tell you about what those requirements are. You are absolutely allowed to say, okay, that's great. What else can we do, right? There are a lot of experts in other cities and counties that are having these conversations. So it's always great to kind of be in conversation with them. There are new publicly available tools that are free and online that you might say, hey, let's collaborate with some of those developers. There are ones out of Princeton University and ones out of Tufts University and some other universities where a collaboration may create a portal where you can receive not only testimony from people, but also maps that they can draw. And literally those mapping apps are almost as simple as being able to navigate Google Maps and Yelp. So if you can figure those two apps out, these mapping apps are really quite simple. And how can we make sure that in this COVID era, when we are now no longer meeting in person, I can't go out and easily do a presentation, right? That hearing rooms, even if we go back to physical meeting spaces, you can't, just pack it with a lot of people. How do we make sure that we create as much accessibility as possible for people? Whether that's thinking about language, whether it's thinking about whether people have some kind of digital, online platform. Do they have the ability to get onto a Zoom call? Are we giving people the ability to call in? Are we thinking about ways that they can give us testimony in different formats? So even if they don't have access to the internet or computer, that they can still tap in and give their presentation. Next slide. Oh, back up one, I think. There we go. So you are in a great place because you are already starting to learn about what the redistricting process is. Now, the timeline is one that's really important, and I know a lot of people keep asking. The apportionment data, which is the data for how many people live in the state of California, will come out at the end of April. Okay, we will then know how many seats will be allocated or apportioned to California as a congressional delegation. That's only the beginning. We will then wait for quite a few months until the end of July, and I am officially hearing it may not come until August or even September. We will not get that data that is down to the block level for each county and each jurisdiction within the state of California. That won't happen until late summer. So one of the things that you should be thinking about right now is, okay, great, it's February. What are we going to do for the next 5 months, 6 months, right? And there's actually quite a bit. This is a perfect time to be lining up the resources. Marguerite's going to be giving you a roadmap of, experts who think about these issues. It's a great time to sort of think about how can we outreach and talk to communities and invite them to give input. It's a great time to kick around a couple of the free software platforms and see if there might be some partnerships, or to choose your experts, your mappers, your vendors, all those things, right? The time that we have up front before we get the data is a perfect time to take community input, because none of that really requires the precision down to the block. Once you get the data then, and you add that to the layer of all that community input that you've already taken, hopefully up through July, August, or even September, then you will be well placed to sort of say, okay, now we're ready because we have all the data that we need. We've been collecting, we've been preparing. We may have even run some simulation based on ACS. Now we're ready to take on this redistricting mapping. So with that, I will say you are in very good hands. You are in the driver's seat. If there are creative ideas that you're thinking about, let me just say 2 ideas that came from the state and from the state commissioners that I would never have thought of. And I want to encourage you to push that way too. One was this idea of who should be the chair. And I'm not saying that you need to go over that deliberation, but this was how creative they got. They decided to rotate the chairpersonship, right? Because they wanted to give each commissioner the opportunity to be in that leadership position, never to be the naysayer, but always to be sort of somebody always had to step into the position of feeling responsible for the whole conversation, right? And also, they came up with the creative idea of after each meeting, finding some time to get together socially, never to talk about the maps, but to learn about each other as human beings. Those 2 ideas, we've never written those into law, but they are the kinds of things that you may choose to do, because those are the ways that you can build trust, and both from the outside and also internally between you all. You will have hard decisions that you need to make with each other. And sometimes being able to see each other as colleagues and people that you respect and trust, maybe you're a little intrigued by each other, but you don't know much about each other. This is a good time to get to know one another. I've heard from the California Redistricting Commission that wine is strongly encouraged. I realize that we're not in shared spaces, so you might have to come up with creative ways to have happy hours with each other, but the redistricting is in your hands, and the citizens are very grateful that you've taken this important job on. Thank you.
Kathy, can you hear me all? Kathy, I can't thank you enough for that. I love that presentation. And the reason, what I love about it is it really puts the soul in redistricting. And the soul of redistricting is communities of interest. And I am so supportive of the idea that there is work to be done now. Those communities can be identified, they can be mapped, they can be all ready to go in a layer for when the data comes in. And what is lovely is, I'm going to go to my next slide, which is right here. I'm taking you back to technicalities, is that the technicalities are flexible enough to allow you to keep the soul in redistricting, which is communities of interest. So once you hear you're supposed to have equal populous districts, one of our future presentations will tell you, yes, but there's flexibility within what equal populace means. So we have a lot of work to do. This is the time for study, and this is the time for gathering together around our communities. And Kathy, thank you for highlighting some of the resources that are out there. The commission right now is working very hard on its initial contracts, and some of these ideas, such as the resources out of Tufts and the resources out of Princeton, will certainly be explored. And so this slide is simply a before and after. And I thought it was going to be kind of neat, and I'd just be able to bold out the new things. And as I looked at my chart when I was done with it, I saw that everything was new. And so this is a chart that just gives you the rules in 2011 and the rules in 2021, and at the very top there with you at the center. And I'm not going to spend a lot of time on it because I want to get to questions. The next slide is a comparison of the criteria. And I pulled that out because they are different from what they were in 2011, the 2021 criteria. And we will go over these in detail, including getting right down to the nitty-gritty. Kathy used words like blocks. What's a block? What's in it? Why do we care about block level data? And just what are, she mentioned the ACS. What are the tools you're going to be using? We want to get into those technicalities for you. So with these trainings, so that you will know exactly what they are. This slide just gives you the language from the statute. How it was before, it was very discretionary, a lot of legislative discretion. The new criteria are mandatory and prioritized. And of course, the top of those lists after federal requirements are communities of interest. And going on to the next slide, and this is very quick. I just want to follow on with Kathy's comments about timeline update. Kathy, you're slightly more current than I had hoped we would have the redistricting data by the middle of August. Maybe that's wishful thinking. The exact date, possible. Exact date is still uncertain, but once that data comes in, it needs to be manipulated and adjusted by our California statewide database. And right now, we understand that's going to take about a month. I may make some calls and see if there's any way that could be sped up. But what it looks like is mapping, drawing those lines that Kathy showed you is actually going to happen in probably the fall. And it's going to be an intense process and not nearly as leisurely as our initial timeline had hoped. The statutory scheme does provide for some flexibility in mapping and posting requirements if we get too close to the deadline. But nothing has changed that deadline yet, which is December 15th. Staff and we are working with an updated timeline, which we will bring to you. It's got to be just kind of wishful thinking still, but at least it moves the process into the fall and gives you an idea of what your fall will look like. And we will get that to you at a future meeting for discussion. It's already underway. And I have not ruled out that there may be a coalition that needs to go to the legislature for help. Otherwise, problems in Washington are going to crush our ability to have a real public input into our mapping and lines. And so next slide. It's your time and questions, raised hands. Kathy's here for you. And if I can jump in, I will.
Before we go to that, first, let me offer thanks that I'm sure we all share for such great presentations. And also, Kathy, in your case in particular, for all that work and commitment over the years. It's much appreciated. It's something I think that drew us all to this function. As I promised earlier, I want to ask first, Andrew, if there are any public comments or requests for public comment.
Thank you, Chair Boehm. We do not have any requests to speak on this item. However, if there are individuals that Feel compelled to speak to this item, please raise your virtual hand in Zoom. We'll be happy to recognize you. Not seeing any virtual hands raised, Chair Bain. It looks like we do not have any public comment on this item.
Very good. Before I open the floor for questions, I do want to just note the time. I'm going to try to keep that politely, but this is a great opportunity to ask questions and lay some foundation for discussion. So at least we can start off with Commissioner Inman and then Commissioner Krugliak. Please, Commissioner Inman.
Yes, thank you very much for the presentation. Very useful. I did sit through the earlier presentation, but second time through, you pick up stuff that you didn't get the first time. So thank you very much. My question goes back to the PL 94 data. And what I've heard is we can't do our job until the state does their job to reallocate incarcerated persons to the best of their ability. Now, is that allocation actually going to matter for 5 districts in San Diego? I mean, is the number of reallocated persons actually going to make a difference? Or could we just pull the PL 94 data off Census website and start crunching numbers to get a head start?
Oh, okay. So that's a really good question. So let me give a few definitions because I'm not sure everybody is as up as Commissioner Inman. So PL 94. I mentioned that there are 2 kinds of data that get released. So let's not worry about the one that was released in April, because that's not going to much help you. The one that you're thinking about is the one that will be released August, September, or October. The technical name for that is it's Public Law 194. And that's the data that goes down to the block level. Will it matter? I guess that really the question is, how many people who are currently incarcerated in other parts of the state originally had their last known address as San Diego? I gotta guess that San Diego does have some significant amount of people who are placed in other parts of the state, or even our other parts of the county. And so to some extent it does matter. The other thing that the statewide the statewide database based at UC Berkeley does is they are reconciling the data because we've got to also look at where your minority populations are. And so you're looking at voting patterns, and census blocks do not match the shapes of census precincts. And so they are doing this kind of matching so that you can overlay them. Now, let me give the simplest definition of what a census block is, because I recently heard this at a conference and I thought I'm going to steal that. Census block is very often, if you were to walk out of your house, turn right, walk 2 blocks, turn right, walk 2 blocks, turn right, walk 2 blocks, you'd make a square, right? And very often a census block is approximately 2 blocks or 4 blocks squared. And it's how many people live in that little area, right? What are their characteristics? And if you think about that as almost like a Lego piece, then you take all the Lego pieces, for your entire county, and that adds up to the total number of people who live in your county. So that is the level of data that you need to get from the Census Bureau that then gets sort of cleaned up by the statewide database at UC Berkeley and then gets handed to San Diego. It may be that they're already at statewide database working to kind of prepare, knowing that the data is coming out late. And what I've heard is that in that preparation, it may be that they can shrink the time. I don't know how much magically they can shrink it. It's not going to be a full month. I think their goal is to have less than that because they know how many entities across the state are going to need that data as soon as possible. But you can do some preliminary work to kind of anticipate where there's growth, because ACS, the American Community Survey, will tell you some of that. But when you really want to refine down to the block level, because remember, you're trying to get to equal population, you need to know down to that level of detail, and you really need the PL 194 for that.
I guess we're not violating any law if we were to just grab PL 94 off Census website and start doing that before.
No, you're not violating laws by doing some simulations beforehand. I suppose like, to some extent, lots of jurisdictions are using that plus the American Community Survey information to get a general sense of where you might put things. And then you're going to wait for that PL 94 to really refine the corners and edges.
If I may, Kathy, Commissioner Inman, I think your suggestion has certainly crossed my mind. I think it's one of the first topics we're going to be talking with our demographic expert is what can we do now to begin to understand simulations, options, problems, solutions, number one. Number two, when the PL data comes out, yes, that lets it get even further refined from the American Community Survey estimates. And then once you get those settled in, take the statewide database data and make your final adjustments along with the adjustments that may be required by the elections office. So I can see an iterative process like that. We're working on getting that demographer now so we can plan that out.
Commissioner Kugliak and then Commissioner Larson.
Thank you very much for a fantastic presentation. My question, just based on the presentation, it sounds like the census data is almost the least important piece. If we think of it as layers, what it seems much more critical is understanding neighborhoods, is understand neighborhood boundaries, is understanding community boundaries, is understanding minority populations, and all of that has nothing to do with the census. I mean, is that fair that the vast majority of what we should be doing is largely on our own without census data, and then when the data comes in, we've already identified the things that can be mixed together, the building blocks, if you will, that can be put into groups, and all that those numbers are telling us is how many have to go into each bucket to get the count the same. Is that fair, or am I just oversimplifying?
Yeah. I don't want to say that the census numbers are not important, because clearly they are, but I do think that let's treat this as an opportunity. If between February and August, you've got to do something, I think that taking in that community testimony is exactly the right thing to do, right? And then thinking about using some of the additional data to provide some general parameters for what you could focus on. The way that maybe one way of thinking about it, and I've been experimenting with this as a metaphor, is if any of you have kids, you know that when they were very, very young, before you let them touch Legos, you start with Duplo, and Duplo is those gigantic blocks. I don't know if you remember those that kids get to play with, and the thing that's safe with those is that they can't swallow them because they're too gigantic. So what you're starting to do is you are creating a general model of what you might be. You're listening to communities. They're giving you shapes on a map, right? And they are. And you're starting to kind of do some simulations. You're kind of using chunky Duplo blocks, okay? When you get the census data, what that's gonna do is it's gonna give you the ability to refine that, right? And say, okay, now we know where the population is, and we know what the total population of the county is, how many people should be in every district, and we're gonna refine those edges. And we're gonna realize, oh, actually, maybe this district that we were sort of thinking about has more population than we expected. So we've got to figure out where on the edges we're going to move some population to a neighboring district, because there's the Duplo blocks are now refined down to the very small Lego pieces, and we need to make sure that we're drawing a district that is not overpopulated. So what the census data, when it comes, is going to tell you is, okay, now this is exactly where people live. Let's see how that fits with kind of where we were thinking about putting people. And then on the edges of the districts that we were thinking about, what populations are we moving in or out to make that population perfect or close to that ideal number.
Commissioner Larson next, then Vice Chair Diaz.
Okay, well, first of all, I sat through the presentation the other day, Kathy. It was excellent. Today's was excellent. And I guess I had one question from the other day that I've been thinking about in my mind.
Okay.
We are basically looking at where people live and vote. And when we talk about communities of interest, there may be many communities of interest that can't be ideally characterized by where people live and vote. Just arbitrary examples, people who own motorcycles, veterans.
Yeah.
We got a direction the other day that we should consider lesbians and gays. Now, my wife and I have many lesbian gay friends. They're spread all over San Diego. And
Yeah.
that's fine. But how would you possibly consider that in the redistricting?
You will sometimes have testimony of people who are describing kind of a presence that is throughout the county or kind of scattered around, right? And that's important because people want to tell you that, you know, they live here and they want to be recognized. You're absolutely right that when you think about communities, to some extent, you're thinking about a much more localized thing, right? So I like to, let me use the community of Asian Americans as a good example, because oftentimes when you look at where we're located, you know, in a county, we're kind of scattered out around the county, right? But there are some neighborhoods that will have a significant population. And so to give a small example, again, I'm sorry, I'm going to use Los Angeles because that's where I'm from. I worked with a community, a neighborhood just north of the downtown of Los Angeles, where a lot of Filipino Americans had moved to, and it was a historic Filipino town. A lot of veterans came just after World War II on the promise of American citizenship, and when they came, they built this neighborhood because there was a particular church with a particular pastor who reached out to that community, right? And they were bringing their foods, their restaurants, you know, people who could provide services in language that they understood. When they went to the legislature to talk about their community, it was a small neighborhood, and they were able to specifically say, if you look at us on the map, it starts with this street, 3rd Street to the north, you know, this street to the south, and it's bound by these streets. And some of the important places that are important to us include the Union Church, this community center, this rec center that we fought hard for, right? So redistricting is very much a place-based acknowledgement of where a community can be. And you're absolutely right, Arv, that sometimes there are going to be communities that are sort of geographically not in a specific place. It's important to take that testimony and to think about it. But when you're thinking about where to draw a line, you are going to ask them, tell me where the streets are, you know, that we might, you know, think about, right? Tell me what institutions or places are important to your community. I mentioned another example in Long Beach, where there was a community, there's actually a lot of communities in Long Beach, but one of the communities was lower income. They're not necessarily one race, right? But they happen to be a lot of lower income working class families that lived along the 710 freeway. And they were particularly, a lot of the people worked around the harbor, but they were also very much impacted by the traffic of trucks that go from the harbor into the county to deliver, you know, and spread out throughout the country, right? All of the things that are being shipped through Long Beach Harbor. That was a community that, you know, if you were to say, oh, let's just look at race, you may not have identified them, right? But for a lot of those people, they say, you know, we share similar jobs, right? We have a very huge impact when it comes to what the environmental effects are of those freeways. And so for that reason, we want to tell you about how the interests that are both sort of the jobs as well as the environmental interest and our source of income kind of unite us as a community. You're listening for things like that, right? You're listening for people who are telling you a narrative about a community that is where they share interests, but they also have a certain geographic bound that you can identify. If you're going to ask questions of them, sometimes you want to ask those questions. That's really amazing. Thank you for that story. Tell me a little bit more about where you're located. Sometimes people these days, more and more people know to come and not only tell you about their community, but also geography. But sometimes it needs a little bit of prompting because you can't map it or you can't pay attention to that community if you don't know where it's located. So it's a good question. And I think that, you know, there are going to be some communities that sort of fit the bill and some that don't.
I'll call on Vice Chair Diaz, Commissioner Krugliak, and ask right now, are there any other commissioners who want to ask questions? Because I'm very protective of everyone's time. Good. So Vice Chair Diaz.
Yes, I just wanted to thank you, Kathy, for such a wonderful introductory presentation. And I look forward to learning more about the redistricting process. And I believe Commissioner Larson really, I think, kind of piqued my interest too, to piggyback off of his response, that I think at every single layer of this process, we just have to remember that the public input process is going to be important. No matter if we're starting from the larger Duplo, whatever you, the big Legos, right?
Duplo blocks?
Yes,
yeah.
Down to the small Legos. Even if we have some sort of an idea of a simulation that we could work with, or you know, data from you know, 5 years ago. The population of San Diego County is so dynamic and has changed so much, even within a short period of time, that sometimes it's hard to actually predict that far ahead. And so it's like, you know, we really have to be careful, I think, and this is going to come into play when we select our for the RFP, the outreach consultant. I'm really hoping that we get someone that can help us grapple with these problems, because you know, there are other populations that are mobile. We have a large homeless population that is living out of their cars. So what's going to happen, you know, with them, and are they going to get a voice? They're eligible to vote. We also have the incarcerated population as well. And so I just think all of these, there's a lot of moving pieces to this, and we don't want to disenfranchise anyone. And I guess it's more of a comment than a question, but and I guess my other question is, for these large areas, expansive spread out areas of San Diego County, which there are many in East County, Northeast County, South by Otay, these are spread out areas. And so the concentration of the population may not be as well defined. And there's a lot of new developments, housing developments. I don't know, in the last 5 years there's been new, but I think it's slowed down or flattened out a little bit, not sure. But there's a lot of population movement, mainly because of the housing prices are driving people out of the county. So I'm just grappling with this problem. I think it's going to be a recurring problem, and I don't know how the rural versus urban areas kind of fit together in the mix with redistricting.
So maybe I should have a little bit more of a specific answer that is thoughtful both about the concerns that you are raising, Commissioner Diaz, but also Commissioner Larson. I think one of the things to think about is that because you have this advanced lead time, right, of several months before the census data comes out, this is a really good time to do outreach. And the outreach is to the many different corners of San Diego, but it's also to sort of tell people, here's the kind of testimony that could be helpful to help us make those decisions, right? So if you talk about the LGBTQ community, yes, you have people who are spread out throughout the county, but many people might also say, you know what, I'd like to identify on the map places that are important to me, like the Hillcrest neighborhood, right? And there may be other neighborhoods as well that I don't know about, right? And so let me tell you what places are important to me. That conversation, when you use some of the free software that gives you prompts, people have the ability to kind of look at a map that looks just like Google Maps. So it's going to feel very, very familiar. They have the ability to kind of put points on it to say, these places are important to my community, right? And then they have the ability to draw a shape around it, like imagine a circle, right? That essentially says, okay, many of the institutions that we care about are in this neighborhood or in this place. And that prompting people through training and education to say, this is what can be useful for us. Tell us about the institutions, the places, the shared culture, the shared experience, the needs that your community has that are centered around this geographic area that you just told us about. That may be the most useful thing that you can do, because then the testimony that comes to you is the kind of testimony that you say, okay, now I get it. I get it because you've told me, and you've sort of answered many of the questions that we might have had, and now we can use that for mapping purposes.
Okay, very good. Commissioner Kugliak, and then we'll move on, please. Still on mute.
Sorry, I had double mute. Things have changed a lot more quickly because of the pandemic. So with people going to remote work and remote work long term, and that's just becoming much more acceptable. There's a much more rapid shift in terms of population, like people living, just moving out of expensive areas because they don't have to be going into the office anymore. All of these things are happening faster than we might think about in terms of a 10-year census. Are there any accommodations for that? Because it's very not natural what's going on right now, and probably is bigger than just natural change.
Yeah, I will say that I think one of the reasons why the Census Bureau is taking longer, not only did they have to suspend operations last year, in the middle of the first round of, COVID spread in March, April, May, but they're taking longer now that they've stopped enumeration. They're taking longer with the data, is because when they were asking people to fill out the census form was when people were living in ways that were totally different than how they might normally live, right? So I imagine, by a show of hands, how many of you had family members or, some other living situation that's not how you normally are for the rest of the year, but you had some extra family members or whatever who are living with you. I know I certainly had, many extended family who we all hunkered down together. And so the Census Bureau is trying to kind of parse out what is a situation that's a temporary situation and what is the situation where people have changed, their place of living permanently. The reality is that the census is only a snapshot at that moment, right? And the minute that you take that census, there will be trends that change kind of where people move. And over time, it's why we do it every 10 years. But what I'll say is that your job is to think about sort of the best that we can do at this moment. How do we take into account where people said that they were on April 1st, 2020? And it is the case that some jurisdictions will say, if there has been some kind of undercount, maybe we need to figure out how we sort of accommodate for that. People who are living without homes are probably the most obvious example of people like that. But what I'll say is that the Census Bureau, one of the reasons why they're taking so much time is that they are trying mightily to account for some of that missing information or some of the changed information that happened during that time period. I want to just say one last thing, and that is that there are, you heard earlier on during the hour, somebody from PANA. There are many nonprofits that have been putting together outreach materials, outreach guides, education materials to try to help people in a totally nonpartisan way think about how to participate in redistricting. Common Cause is one of them, but there are many other organizations as well. And so I would just put out the offer to the commissioners that if you are looking to bring on, a consultant, which is fantastic, do encourage them to collaborate with this universe of groups that want to be helpful, because it will amplify, the dollars that you put into it tenfold, and will also give your consultants a place to start so they don't have to start entirely from scratch. And with that, I just want to thank you for the audience and for your time. And I know that you're going to do all of us proud. Please consider me an ongoing research, and I'll type in my email afterwards if there's anybody who's got a need to sort of bring up additional questions or have some additional assistance.
Kathy, that's a great line to end on. I appreciate it. Commissioner Serban, is it something quick?
Yeah, Chairman, I just wanted one thing to come out of this thing is you said two good ideas out of the State Commission were the rotating chairmanship, and then the other social
Oh,
thing.
social.
Right. I'm not quite sure how we would address doing that ourselves, but I did want to take that forward from your presentation and pick it up again at some other time. Make sure that we do that.
Good. Good.
Thanks for that. And Kathy already answered the key question, that you're willing to stay in communication with us, because I know there's
Yes.
going to be a lot more going, and I think there's some great ideas out there for continuing to expand. I particularly wanted to just mention, because it came in an e-comment just now, another organization that's willing to help and talk to us. And I'd ask commissioners, as we move into our next agenda items, do keep that in mind about how we work, because I've heard all the positive comments from colleagues with these organizations, not just in hearing what they have to tell us, but seeing what else they're doing that we can benefit from and have good exchanges on. So with that, Kathy, Marguerite, thank you very much for those presentations. Again, much appreciated.
Thank you
You're
so
welcome
much.
to stay as
Thank
long as
you.
you
I enjoyed it very much. Thank you, Kathy.
Very good. So
Good
moving
luck.
on.
I think you'll feel much more comfortable making all your decisions without me. So bye.
I never moved past Duplo myself. I still use it. So we're building a little bit.
Nice.
Very good. All right. So moving on to agenda item 6, selection of ad hoc committee members for procurements. My anticipation is this will move relatively quickly, because we're really just moving forward on selection. But as background, you'll recall that at our last meeting on the 28th, the commission approved the process outlined by the ad hoc committee for RFPs. Thank you again, all who served on that committee. At that time, the commission approved the formation of 2 additional ad hoc committees, one for each procurement, to draft the RFP documents. The ad hoc committee recommended that all commissioners be included in the pool of potential participants for each of the RFP ad hoc committees to come, one being on demography and mapping, one being on outreach and communication, unless a commissioner chose to opt out of a specific role or RFP. Based on the feedback received from the commissioners on their preferences, staff are going to present and use a tool today to randomly select commissioners, which the IRC can then discuss and vote to approve. This tool is also the same tool we've been using for randomized voting on each action and item. Before we move into the process itself, let me ask Andrew if there are any members of the public who wish to comment.
Thank you, Chair Boehm. We do not have any advanced requests from the public to speak on this item, but I will give a moment for individuals that might want to address the commission to raise their virtual hand in Zoom. Seeing no virtual hands raised, looks like there's no public comment on this item.
Very good. So I'll now turn to Barbara to conduct the process, explain it a little more so everyone understands how we're doing it, and then update us as she can on timelines and at least imminent next steps, so we have an idea of what's coming. Barbara.
Thank you, Chair. And I'm actually going to flip it real quick. I'm going to put up first just a very, very rough timeline. Maritza, if you can go to the next slide. And so I hesitated on the one hand to put this because the ad hocs are the ones that are going to really determine this. But we did get individual questions about the goals, sort of what did we want? What would be the key dates ideally in order to get to being able to execute contracts by the beginning of May. So what you see here is just a very rough anticipated timeline with some key dates. Really quickly, the February 17th date, that will be the date that the staff can send all the RFP document drafts as well as copy of any other RFPs from other jurisdictions to the ad hoc committee with a copy of a timeline. One thing I do want to offer for both of the RFPs or for the ad hocs that are being, they're going to work on this, is while staff are not part of the ad hocs, we are happy to do a presentation to the ad hoc when they kick off to answer any of the procurement sort of questions, county procurement sort of questions, any questions around how we can support Industry Day, or just general overview of what some of the RFP processes or documents would entail. And so targeting a Industry Day open to the public on February 24th. And then again, we have some of these key dates here. A couple of highlights.
Oh, I've lost Barbara completely. Let's.
Commissioner Boehm, I think I can take it from here while she gets back on, because I will be getting to the fun randomizer tool. Yeah, she was just kicked off. She's just letting me know. So I'll just take it from here and then she can jump in when she gets back on. So I think what Barbara was kind of leading to is that this one's for the demographic services anticipated timeline. So let's see, we would like to work with ad hoc and have them have potential final documents by March 5th. And then we would post it for the March 11th IRC meeting. The ad hoc committee would then present their RFP to the full IRC commission, who will vote to approve or reject the RFP. But assuming that the RSC would accept the RFP would then be posted as soon as possible, maybe even earlier than March 16th, but wanted to give us a little bit of time just in case. And then RFP submissions will be due March 30th, and then staff will begin the selection process. Staff will then present SSC recommendations for IRC concurrence on April 22nd. And if concurred, we anticipate to execute the contract in the beginning of May. Of course, this is an anticipated timeline, like Barbara mentioned, and the ad hoc may make changes. Also, there could be other unforeseen delays that could impact the timeline, but we're hoping to have a contractor on board by May, so then the IRC can really start developing plans and working on next steps with the contractor. Moritz, if you can go to the next slide. So the outreach and engagement services is a similar timeline. They just will be running a little bit later. The way we were hoping that it would be is that the IRC would approve one RFP at each meeting in March. There could be a possibility they could do it both on the earlier date, but just foreseeing, just technicalities and just that, we just assume it would run about, a meeting after. So then it would be the same process. We would send the documents. We would, the one thing that we're thinking of to make it easier for the commissioners is to have the Industry Day for both RFPs on February 24th or a date, somewhere there. So then the commissioners can just block that date for, a couple of hours versus doing an Industry Day on this day and then an Industry Day on that day. So we're thinking we could have it on the same day, whether it's February 24th. We would do the same process and we would bring this back to March 25th, where the ad hoc would present and seek the IRC for approval. We would then post the RFP on March 30th, and then we would bring this back on May 13th for the IRC to concur and then execute late May. Now, some of the May 13th, when we approve, we plan to have like the contract, at least in some form. So we may be able to, get it earlier, but these are just kind of a speedy timeline that we think that staff and, would be able to do. Now, of course, that can change and we can always add more time. So moving on to now the selection part of this process. Once again, I don't think I even introduced myself, but I'm Liberty, and I think I've talked with many of you, but let's see. So basically the competitive procurement Process Ad Hoc Committee recommended that all the commissioners be included in the pool of participants for each of the RFP ad hoc committees, unless a commissioner chose to opt out of a specific role or RFP. As you can see here, these are listings of all the roles, and we will be choosing one commissioner to serve as the Demographic Services RFP ad hoc committee member who has RFP experience, 2 commissioners to serve as the Demographic Services RFP ad hoc committee general members, 1 commissioner to serve as the Outreach and Engagement Services RFP and ad hoc committee member who has RFP experience, and then 2 commissioners to serve as the Outreach and Engagement Services RFP ad hoc committee general members. As envisioned and requested by the Competitive Procurement Process Ad Hoc Committee, I will use a tool to randomly identify commissioners for each of the roles I just mentioned, for a total of 6 commissioners, 3 on each ad hoc committee. If a commissioner is selected for a role, they will then be removed from the subsequent pools as I continue through the selection process for the other roles. Before I start the selection, I'd like to share all the existing pools based on commissioners' feedback. If commissioners would like to make any changes, when I open up each of the randomizer tools, I will ask at that time for any changes. Please note that the selection of roles have been prioritized by the pool with the least number of commissioners to the pool with the most commissioners. As commissioners are selected, I will remove those commissioners from the following list if they are on there. And then this is where I will, Maritza, thank you. I'm going to share my screen. Now, commissioners, I'm going to preface this that this all worked during our practice Zoom. So I'm hoping that will be the same as I move forward. So please let me know if you see the first, I'll begin with the first selection of 1 commissioner to serve as the Demographic Services RFP ad hoc committee member who has RFP experience. This randomizer tool is the same tool we use for random voting. Prior to this meeting, I took the existing commissioner list and completed 1 random sort. I then removed all the commissioners that opted out. The blank rows represent commissioners I removed, and the commissioners who are part of this pool are Commissioner Chen, Commissioner Larson, and Commissioner Hansen. I will begin the random sort now. The first name that shows up at the top will be, sorry, I wanted to just double check. Was there anyone that wanted to be added to this? Any commissioners? Okay, then I will just move forward. So the first name that shows up at the top will be the commissioner that is selected. And that is Commissioner Larson. Commissioner Larson has been selected to serve as the Demographic Services RFP ad hoc committee member who has RFP experience. Maritza, please mark this name down for the final list. I will close this up. Okay. I will now begin with the second selection of 1 commissioner who will serve as the Outreach and Engagement Services RFP ad hoc committee member with RFP experience. As mentioned, this randomizer tool is the same tool we use for random voting. I took the existing commissioner list and completed 1 random sort. I then removed all the commissioners that opted out. The blank rows represent the commissioners I removed. The current commissioners who are part of this pool are Commissioner Hansen, Commissioner Katerina, Vice Chair Diaz, and I'll have to remove Commissioner Larson from the list. And at this time, do I have any commissioners that would want to make any changes? And I apologize, I cannot see the whole gallery at this point. So if someone wants to change it, they would just have to put themselves off mute. Okay, perfect. So I will begin the random sort now. The first name that shows up at the top will be the commissioner selected. And that will be Vice Chair Diaz. Vice Chair Diaz has been selected to serve as the Outreach and Engagement Services RFP ad hoc committee member with RFP experience. Maritza, please mark that name down for the final list. Okay, this is working out pretty well. I will now begin with the third selection of the 2 commissioners to serve as the Demographic Services RFP ad hoc committee general members. As mentioned, this is the same randomizer tool. Prior to this meeting, I took the existing list and completed one random sort. I then removed all of the commissioners that opted out. The blank rows represent the commissioners I removed. The current commissioners who are part of this pool are Commissioner Larson, Hanson, Commissioner Inman, Commissioner Krugliat, and Commissioner Russ. I will remove Commissioner Larson from the pool and just making sure, perfect. And at this time, do I have any commissioners who want to make any changes? Okay, I will begin the random sort now. So this one will be a little different because it will be the first two names that show up at the top will be the commissioners selected. So that'll be Commissioner Hanson and Commissioner Inman, who have been selected to serve as the Demographic Services RFP Ad Hoc Committee members. Maritza, please mark that name down for the final list. Okay. Now I will begin with the last selection of two commissioners who will serve as the Outreach and Engagement Services RFP Ad Hoc Committee general members. This is the same randomizer tool. Prior to the meeting, I took the existing list and completed one random sort. I then removed all the commissioners that opted out. The blank rows represent the commissioners I removed. The current commissioners who are part of this pool are Commissioner Inman, Commissioner Hanson, Commissioner Larson, Commissioner Krugliak, Commissioner Garcia, Vice Chair Diaz, Commissioner Katerina, and Commissioner Servin. I will be removing Commissioner Inman, Commissioner Hanson, Commissioner Larson, and Vice Chair Diaz. At this time, do I have any commissioners that would like to make any changes? Okay, so I will begin the random sort now. The first two names that show up at the top will be the commissioner selected, and that will be Commissioner Katerina and Commissioner Garcia, who have been selected to serve as the Outreach and Engagement Services RFP Ad Hoc Committee members. Maritza, please mark the names down. I will stop my share and she will put that back up, and then I'll read it just one more time for the final list. Perfect, thank you, Maritza. So for the selection one, Demographic Services RFP Ad Hoc Committee member with RFP experience, that's Commissioner Larson. Selection two, Outreach and Engagement Services RFP Ad Hoc Committee member with RFP experience is Vice Chair Diaz. Selection three, Demographic Services RFP Ad Hoc Committee members, Commissioner Inman and Commissioner Hanson. Selection four, Outreach and Engagement Services RFP Ad Hoc Committee members, Commissioner Katerina and Commissioner Garcia. Thank you very much, commissioners. I will now return this back to Chair Bain.
Thank you very much for stepping in, Liberty. Thank you, Barbara, for your part and for rejoining us. I'm glad it worked out. Remarkably smooth process. And most of all, thanks to all the commissioners who put themselves forward for this. It's a lot of work. Before I entertain a motion to approve all this, Commissioner Inman.
Yeah, I just wanted to make a comment about the timelines, if I could just quickly. I think based on what I've heard from the other commissioners, we might want to reverse it so that outreach goes first and demographer second. I don't know, but in just what I've been hearing, it might want to prioritize the outreach over the demographer. That's my comment.
Thank you for that. Let me ask that we hold on discussion. It's a very good point. I think we should add it to our discussion under the motion, which I promise will be brief. Let me ask first, though, is there a motion to approve the members of the two ad hoc committees? Again, for demographics, Commissioners Larson, Hanson, and Inman. For outreach, Vice Chair Diaz, Commissioner Katerina, Commissioner Garcia. Do I have a motion to approve those six?
So moved.
So moved.
Okay, I'll take a motion from Commissioner Russ. Do I have a second?
A second.
Commissioner Servin. Excellent. Let me just reflect something I wanted to make sure I added to the conversation. I think Commissioner Inman makes a good point. I think the original anticipation for dealing with demography first was because of the data timeline as well. But I think, as Liberty was saying, we can easily have the two ad hoc committees talk to staff about how to bring them together. If I'm understanding things right, though, I think the next major thing to be aware of and for the ad hoc committees to agree on early is that industry day, whether to do it on the 24th and whether both can be done that day. We have a meeting of the commission the very next day. And so I'll ask the two committees to please be ready to present on the 25th to update on how things are going for the process. With that understanding, any comments on the motion to approve the 6? Very good. Andrew, would you please call the roll for a vote?
Thank you. Commissioner Larson,
Aye.
Commissioner Kugliak,
Aye.
Commissioner Dostal,
Aye.
Commissioner Garcia,
Aye.
Commissioner Russ,
Aye.
Commissioner Hanson,
Aye.
Vice Chair Diaz,
Aye.
Commissioner Inman,
Aye.
Chair Bain, I saw a thumbs up. Perfect. Thank you. Commissioner Brown,
Aye.
Commissioner Chen, Commissioner Serban,
Aye.
Commissioner Katerina,
Aye.
Commissioner Pons.
Aye.
That motion passes unanimously with all commissioners who are present voting aye.
Thank you again, Andrew. Thank you all commissioners. I'll ask Commissioner Inman to lower his hand because we're going to have our usual fun tracking hands, but I appreciate it. We'll move on now to agenda item 7, discussion and possible formation of standing and/or ad hoc committees. I'd like to turn this agenda item's discussion and the lead for it to Vice Chair Diaz, please.
Thank you, Chairman. I appreciate the opportunity to facilitate this item to organize the work of our commission. I just want to commend the work that's gone in already to form ad hoc RFP and all of the work. I know it's a lot of work that you guys have already done, and I just want to commend that. There's a lot more work that needs to be done, obviously, and so this is the time where we can organize ourselves. And I will, the commission has received the staff report with additional information and answers to some of our questions on this topic. At a previous meeting, we heard from council about the Brown Act requirements for both standing subcommittees and ad hoc committees. I will now turn it to Barbara for brief comments. And Barbara, are you there?
Here, and I'm glad it was my technology. It Zoom kicked me out versus Liberty's, because I know she worked really hard to make sure this randomizer would work. So, and she was ready to step in, which I appreciate. Really quickly, I'm hoping everyone had a chance to look at the staff report. We put a chart together that really highlighted everyone's interests, and we did have an errata that was posted afterwards because we wanted to make sure to capture everyone's input. One thing just to note is that was in the report was those rough estimate of cost that's necessary when you're supporting an ad hoc committee versus a standing committee, just to ensure that we're in compliance with the Brown Act, and sort of the estimate of hours of staff time, counsel, translation, et cetera. I did want to note something that, depending on any discussion or decisions the IRC does take today or in the future, budget adjustments would need to be made if we went in the direction of standing committees. We just need to be aware of that. For example, any of our county council or our IRC council costs, we already anticipate, I mentioned this before, that our legal services costs are actually going to be more than we initially anticipated. So at a future meeting, I believe the next meeting we're scheduled for a regular budget update, we'll bring back more details about that, but I wanted to make sure to mention that. And then we're here to answer any questions that you may have. So with that, it concludes my comments, and I return it to you, Vice Chair Diaz.
Thank you, Barbara. Are there any clarifying questions from the commissioners for Barbara or staff? Clarifying questions before we hear from the public speakers and then discuss the item? Okay, Seeing none. Andrew, are there any requests from the public to speak on this item?
Thank you, Vice Chair Diaz. We do not have any advance requests to speak on this item, but I would like to open it up for any members of the public that are attending. If they would like to address the commission, please raise your hand in Zoom. We will acknowledge you. Vice Chair, not seeing any hands raised. It appears there is no public communication on this item.
Well, thank you, Andrew. I just want to say, the staff, you did such a tremendous job putting this report together and compiling all of our feedback. I think it was important to hear from each and every commissioner because a lot of us coming into this really had a lot of great ideas. And I just really wanted to point that out and thank you for your feedback. We received 29 individual suggestions for committees from commissioners. And considering that and the information from council, I'm focusing on the ability of the public to follow and participate in our work. I'd like the idea of doing that just at our regular meetings and not adding standing committees that would have to be separately noticed. So the idea was, if you recall in previous meetings, is that ad hoc would not, Brown Act would not apply for that. We wouldn't have to post public agendas. And for standing committees, we would have to do all that. So considering that we do have some defined projects coming up, could very well be that we establish an ad hoc committee. And then if the work progresses and it becomes ongoing, then there could be a potential standing committee. So I just want to plant that idea in your head because I do like the suggestions by staff for small work groups functioning as ad hoc committees to think about and address the specific issues, for example, that was also mentioned in past meetings and in the staff report, the need to further refine that list of trainings that we've been talking about become ever more important now, and the communication surrounding that, bringing back the recommendations to the full commission. As far as the others, I'd like to have a good conversation about prioritizing suggestions because this list represents a significant time commitment for our commission and the public. I think we can start by looking at the suggestions that we received that received the most interest from commissioners. And as you see in the staff report, there was definitely interest on forming those committees, and the ones with the most, I would think we can start looking at those suggestions. And can we see that table there? Okay, so there in the table we had an overwhelming, the majority of the support, I would say, commissioner training and education. And then the other one that received a lot of interest was the public outreach, communication, redistricting, outreach and communications, public communications development, oversight, public outreach and engagement. It's a lot, it's a mouthful there. But I think that really kind of shows where we're at. And I just wanted to, in the interest of efficiency and time, I think we should limit the scope of work to these committees to a specific deliverable. And this would make them ad hoc. So once that's complete, the ad hoc committee can then make a recommendation to create a standing committee, as I've described before. That way our decision can be informed by the research that the ad hocs do. Instead of forming these standing committees now, we could just kind of really think about what work really needs to get done and start thinking of it as a way to plan. And so that being said, I'll move that we don't take action to create any standing subcommittees at this time, but that we form the ad hoc committee proposed in the staff report for training and outreach and communication. And then the other, I guess I could do this as one motion, correct, Andrew, if there's more than one ad hoc?
Certainly, yes.
Okay, so I would like to move that we form or consider forming an ad hoc for the commissioner training and education, and the public outreach and community. How do we want to name that? Is that the public outreach and communication redistricting, as in the staff report? Or have we, I guess it's listed in the staff report as redistricting, outreach, and communication. So is there a second to that motion?
A second.
Okay, we have a second by Commissioner Dostal. I'm sorry. Is that a motion? Sorry, I was the one that proposed the motion, but I'm sorry, I jumped too far ahead.
I like the motion as you proposed it. That's what I was.
Okay.
We don't discuss any permanent standing committees right now, but I think we see that there are two. I agree with you that there are two that clearly there's a lot of interest in, and therefore I think at this point we can establish those or to discuss them. And if there's more later, there's more later, but I think those two are pretty clear. I agree with you, and I agree with that motion.
Okay, so seconded by Commissioner Dostal. And any discussion from the commission, from the other commissioners?
Yeah, Vice Chair, this is, I don't know if you can see my hand raised. Can you see that?
Yes, I
do.
do.
Okay, good. And you hear, okay, good. Yeah, actually, I think those would be two good ad hoc committees. In my own way of thinking, when I put down communities of interest, that really juxtaposes, I think, with this redistricting outreach. I mean, that was kind of in my thought process, was getting the community to come in, those communities of interest, and we're already hearing some of it. You know, we've been hearing it from Ms. Eckstein. We hear from her quite often. And so my thought is, as I said, the communities of interest would be an outreach. You know, who are the communities? We all can probably think of some, but there are probably a lot out there that we haven't thought. So in any event, I think particularly that ad hoc committee, I think that one is extremely important one for now. And the training is an important one for now.
Thank you, Commissioner Russ. I have Commissioner Inman and then Commissioner Pons. Commissioner Inman?
Thank you. So I support the motion as is, but we're going to form ad hoc committees that have to have a specific deliverable detailed. As the motion reads right now, I don't think we've specified what the deliverable is. And so does that have, do we need to do something like amend this with deliverables, or how is that going to work? What exactly are they going to return us and when?
That's a great question, Commissioner. I guess that would be up to the ad hoc once it's formed. And so this motion would be to form the ad hoc. And well, if there is, yes.
I mean, well, I guess to offer a suggestion, it's like it's an ad hoc committee for outreach to go and identify the groups that could help us in the outreach. And that's a deliverable that they would then return. I guess there are forms of deliverables, but I don't think, I mean, and maybe this is a question for staff. Can we leave it up to the ad hoc committee to decide what they're going to do, or do we need to tell them what they're going to do?
If I may, Vice Chair Diaz, in the staff report, and Commissioner Inman, we did have a recommendation, or a thought regarding redistricting, outreach, and communication. We talked about the possibility that this ad hoc could address some of the questions that have been raised by commissioners and the public regarding outreach and communication, particularly in the time period prior to onboarding of a public outreach and engagement contractor and before census data is available. Specific tasks may include review and development of recommendations for the county existing process for redistricting communication, including website content, requests from public to make presentations at commission meetings, and other opportunities for public engagement subject to the approval of the full commission. So Andrew, correct me if I'm wrong, but if the motion indicates that it would follow the recommendation by staff in the staff report, would that cover the question. And then, of course, once the ad hoc gets together, they could go from there. But would that meet the intent of the action, or would that work for everyone?
Yeah, Commissioner Inman, I want to ask if you wanted to make amend the motion with that language.
Yeah, that deliverables are per the staff report of our June 28th meeting.
Okay.
February 11th was the staff
Oh,
report.
11th.
February 11th.
Okay.
Okay.
Okay. Okay.
Would it be helpful if I read the commissioner training one, Vice Chair Diaz?
Yes, that would be very helpful. Thank you.
So this one was, this ad hoc committee could further refine and detail the current approved commissioners list of training topics, including guest speakers, and develop a recommended plan for these to appear on future agendas of the commission's regular meetings in coordination with county staff and council, subject to the approval of the full commission. Because these are ad hocs, both of them require the full approval of the IRC.
Okay, does that satisfy your question, Commissioner?
Yes. Yes.
Commissioner Pons.
Yes, thank you. So my question goes to the issue of the process. So when the ad hoc committee approves, delivers a plan for approval, and once that plan is approved by the commission, if there are any changes to the plan, will that ad hoc committee have to be stood up again? So if this is a repetitive process and the selection of those ad hoc committees continues, that could be really time consuming. So if that's the process for ad hoc committees to be selected through a random process each and every time, is that how it would go, Ms. Jimenez?
No, we've actually had two examples. So when the ad hoc committee was selected for the RFP process, we actually did it here at the meeting. So if the desire of the commission is to take both of these ad hocs, we could do it in public right now. The reason we did the randomizer, which was the longer process, and I reached out to everyone to get their input, was because we had not selected the two ad hocs at the last meeting, because some needed to go back and look at whether they had RFP experience, which RFP they wanted to go to. So we could, to answer your question, Commissioner Pons, do that today and live for everyone. Hillary, is there anything I missed?
Yeah, I just wanted to add one thought to that, Barbara, which is that the requirement for an ad hoc committee is that they go to accomplish a specific task in a relatively short period of time, and that they are not meeting on an ongoing basis with regularity. But just because the ad hoc may need to meet more than once, for example, doesn't mean that they would need to be reconvened multiple times. So that may help alleviate some of the efficiency concerns as well.
Okay, so if we define the number of individuals on that ad hoc committee, I would just make a recommendation that there's a pool of individuals that are interested in being on that committee. And that way you can sort of just pull in individuals, rotate them and say, listen, these four individuals will be now part of the committee, the ad hoc committee. And that keeps the process a little bit more fluid and more efficient, I think. And so that would be my recommendation. A pool of individuals to support those ad hoc committees that can be selected and chosen and installed really quickly and not take up too much time in this 2-hour time frame that we have.
Yes, I agree 100%, Commissioner Pons, and that is why I was going to ask if it was possible within this same motion to, if there are commissioners that desire to be part of either of those ad hoc committees, that we could just take a vote today on that. But first we have to approve the ad hoc. As I understand, please clarify if I'm wrong, Andrew, if I need to do one before the other, or if I could do it all together.
I think the preference would be for the commission to vote on forming these committees, and then, or these ad hoc committees, and then go through a separate action to appoint individuals to those.
Okay, great. Thank you for clarifying, Andrew. Commissioner Pons.
I'm sorry to interrupt. I think one of the points of being able to do it here is so that the public also is aware who actually are the members that are going to be in the ad hocs.
Good, thank you. I'm done.
Commissioner, I can't remember who is next, but Commissioner Brown?
Yes, I just had a comment about Commissioner Pond's statement, and that was, I think that's a good idea to get maybe a bigger group, a pool to pull from that's interested in being on the commission, and maybe they can rotate in and out to accomplish whatever the ad hoc has to accomplish, and it helps us with our schedules too, because I don't know if I can commit to every single day, you know, as far as the when there's, I know the ad hoc's just going to be one subject that we're looking at and having to come up with suggestions on, but it could take some time, and I don't know about you guys, but it's kind of hard sometimes to fit it all into the schedule. So, and I want to be able to be involved with it, but at the same time, I don't know that I can commit over a long period of time, every, you know, two times a week or something like that. So that would make it more flexible for me if they were able to rotate. You could still be on the committee, but have maybe 6 people on the committee, and then they could end up with always having 4 or 5 that would be available. How would that work? You know what I'm saying?
Well, there are 6 max that can be on an ad hoc.
And that would allow for absences.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Commissioner Garcia.
Thanks. I think that the amendment to the motion, I was going to actually try and clarify what I thought the scope of the outreach and communication ad hoc committee would do. I don't think I need to do that any longer, but it does raise for me another question, and it's maybe a question of process, which is that will the ad hoc committee be limited in its scope to just those things that we identified that Barbara read from the document that was circulated to us? Or, you know, if there were something else that came up, would the ad hoc committee be able to take that on?
So the way we've written it, and I'll have the clerk of the board correct me if I'm wrong, indicates could address these areas, and these are the following areas that may be considered. So I would say this is sort of you're not limited to that, in the way it was phrased.
Right. I mean, a lot of these, actually, I brought up some of these issues. And I'm very interested in outreach and communication, interested in knowing exactly what we're doing now. For me, it's not all that clear how we're, you know, what we're doing with regards to outreach, besides just the website at the county, you know, the county website. So anyway, I wanted to clarify that. Thank you.
And then for those that are interested in the ad hocs, hearing some of the concerns about possible time impacts, knowing that we just picked 6 of you to participate on the RFPs, that might be a consideration as well. So in terms of how many folks want to be able to participate in the timelines.
Chair Bain?
Actually, I think Commissioner Serban had his hand up first. And if you don't mind, I'll refer to him and then come back.
Okay, go ahead. Go ahead, Commissioner.
Not a problem. So just to understand, the motion on the floor right now is the creation of 2 ad hoc committees tasked with a scope of work that includes what's stated in the staff report. Do I have that understanding correct?
Correct.
Okay. So do we want, and I see that in the staff report, what the commission, the ad hoc committees would, prior to taking action, would have to obtain approval from the full commission. So I'm wondering if that's something we want, or I guess I'm thinking of a scenario where, let's say, the outreach commission or committee decides, hey, let's change our website in some way I mean, do we really want, do we need to have that come before the full committee or the full commission, or is that a committee level? Can that be a committee level decision? And I guess maybe council would be able to weigh in on what's required there of us.
The ad hoc is going to be made up of less than a quorum. By its terms, it has to be. So they're not going to be empowered to take formal action on behalf of the IRC. They're going to be coming up with a recommendation to the IRC to accomplish specific tasks that are within that limited purview of the ad hoc committee.
Okay, so I guess maybe the question is, does changing the content of the website require an official act of the IRC?
It depends. I mean, it's a difficult question to answer in the abstract. It depends upon what kind of change you're talking about. If it's something that would normally be done at a staff level, where you're just kind of, making minor tweaks. If you're kind of overhauling the website, I think it's something that's better that we look at kind of in a concrete manner once we see what the ad hoc committees, what they're doing and what their recommendation is going to be, and make a determination as to whether they are doing something that's substantive and should really come back before the full commission.
Okay, so but otherwise the committees would be entrusted with governing themselves and all of that. I mean, I guess the motion before us is just to create the committees, form them, and then the committees will be off on their own to try to figure out whatever they're going to do and how they're going to do it.
That's right. The committees would be, the committees are going to go and discuss these items, and their goal is going to be to make a recommendation to the full IRC. To the extent that staff is, doing things with the content of the website, that could happen at a staff level, but the IRCs aren't going to be empowered to go off on their own and actually do things other than report back to the full IRC. So does that answer your question?
Yeah, okay.
Chair Bay.
Thanks. Great comments by all and much appreciated, because it brings out some of the thoughts I had. I wanted to just ask staff and council first to confirm that these ad hoc committees would be able to come back to staff and council just like the RFP ad hoc committees, correct? You'd be available for them.
Correct, absolutely, yes.
Okay. The ad hoc committees would also be able to talk about ideas with outside groups and people. They couldn't agree to anything on behalf of the commission, but if the training ad hoc committee wanted to explore further what a proposal was from a group to offer some training, they would be empowered to do that. That wouldn't cross any lines, would it?
Hillary, I'm going to defer to you to confirm that would be appropriate.
You're exactly right, Chair Boehm. They are empowered to act in an information gathering capacity. They are not empowered to act as a spokesperson on behalf of the committee that is governed by the bylaws, and that would be the chair unless the chair designates someone else in writing.
Which, thank you very much, because you anticipated just the point I wanted to make sure to bring up, building off what Commissioner Garcia and others have said. I would hope that the Outreach and Communication Committee could take a brief look at ideas on how we engage media, because we are getting calls now, as you've all seen, and I think we could have a broader, more inclusive process that wouldn't put the chair as the sole voice of the commission. I think there are ways to do that, but I think that would be a possible topic that would still fit within the tasking from the report and previous discussions, but isn't explicitly identified. I think there are a number of ideas like that could work to address Commissioner Sturban's point. I think if we use the website, for instance, to be a kind of library for all of us with presentations or resources we find that we want to share with each other, that to me is something that's relatively easy. as opposed to say translating the website into 3 more languages, which would be the kind of resource directed requirement that I think would require full commission approval. Already said more than I planned. Sorry about that.
And one thing, Chair Boehm, I just wanted to add before we move on from this is that all of the normal rules are going to apply with respect to ex parte communications and other things that are required by the bylaws. Just because it's happening through an ad hoc committee, it doesn't change any of those normal processes.
Commissioner Inman.
So I would, in a comment, I guess, one of the things that these subcommittees could definitely look at and come back with a recommendation on is the need to form a standing committee. For example, the outreach could come back and say, listen, there's more to this than an ad hoc committee can really address in a timely manner. We need to form a standing committee. So I think this is the first step in that direction. The next step would be to say, listen, we need standing committees, or that could be part of a recommendation that an ad hoc committee could make. That's it.
Thank you for that clarification, Commissioner Inman. If there are any, I just want to make sure that we're clear on the motion that's on the floor, is that it's been amended. The motion as amended by Commissioner Inman is to approve the formation of ad hoc committees, commissioner training ad hoc, and the redistricting, outreach, and communication ad hoc. And with the understanding that these committees will have, these ad hocs will have a specified timeline to complete a specified project. And knowing that in the staff report, there are some suggestions and recommendations which can be further refined based on your input today, or based on your input once these ad hocs are formed. But today we're going to vote on this motion. And I know it was seconded. Now that it's an amended motion, do I hear a second to this motion as proposed by Commissioner Inman?
Vice Chair Diaz, the motion can remain on the floor as it is from you, with the second by Commissioner Dostal, so long as you both are comfortable with those amendments.
Okay, are you comfortable with those amendments, Commissioner Dostal? Okay, perfect. So do I guess we can call the roll on this amended motion, correct?
Correct, be happy to.
Okay.
All right, Commissioner Krugliak.
Aye.
Commissioner Serban.
Aye.
Commissioner Pons.
Aye.
Chair Boehm.
Aye.
Commissioner Hanson.
Aye.
Commissioner Brown.
Aye.
Commissioner Larson.
Aye.
Commissioner Katarina.
Aye.
Vice Chair Diaz.
Aye.
Commissioner Russ.
Aye.
Commissioner Garcia.
Aye.
Commissioner Dostal.
Aye.
Commissioner Inman.
Aye.
Commissioner Chen. The motion passes unanimously with all commissioners who are present voting aye.
Thank you. So I guess we would then open it up to members of the commission who have thought about if they want to join these ad hoc committees that were just formed and approved today. And remember that the maximum number of commissioners can only be 6 on each one. And knowing the time commitment, if you're already part of another ad hoc committee, just kind of keep that in mind. And I would like to, I guess, start by seeing if someone would like to make a motion to, because we have to approve the members first. So who would, I guess maybe I should do this. Who would like to be part of the ad hoc commissioner training committee? Do I have hands? Okay, I have Commissioner Brown. I have Commissioner Serban. Did you have your hand up? Okay. Commissioner Pons. Anyone else? No one else? Okay, Commissioner Inman. I have so far Commissioner Brown, Pons, and Inman. And Commissioner Hansen. All right. Going once, going twice. Okay, so the motion, would someone like to motion or someone move to approve Brown, Pons, Inman, and Commissioner Hansen to the ad hoc training committee?
So
I
moved.
so move the motion be approved.
Can I,
Sure.
can I suggest that we instead first see if we have enough people for both? And then approve both of them separately?
Okay. I have no problem doing that. We could do that separately. Sorry, did I miss somebody?
Durbin.
Oh, Commissioner Brown. Did you have
I think
something?
Commissioner Serban, didn't you say that you were interested?
In which? I'm sorry.
Training?
Oh, no.
Oh, no. Okay. Sorry, I thought you were right after me.
Okay, moving on to the ad hoc outreach and redistricting committee.
Mhm.
Do I see any volunteers? Commissioner Katarina. And Commissioner Garcia, and anyone else? Commissioner Serban. Going once, going twice. Oh, Commissioner Bain. Okay. This is actually fun, kind of fun. Anyone else? I feel like I'm at a auction. I wasn't going once, going twice. All right, so we've got 2 ad hoc, each with 4 commissioners on each one for a total of 8. So we've got Commissioners Brown, Pons, Inman, and Hansen on the ad hoc training committee. And we've got Commissioners Katarina, Garcia, Serban, and Bain on the outreach and redistricting committee. Oh, yes, Commissioner Serban. Did you have something to say?
I wanted to maybe propose, or does anyone feel strongly enough about the other subcommittees that they suggested that they want to advocate on behalf of that subcommittee in forming an ad hoc committee of that nature? So because I see there were 3 people interested in the budget development. There were a couple people that were interested in a couple other committees. So if anyone is particularly feeling strongly about those committees, maybe I would be interested in hearing why they feel that way, and maybe the commission ought to consider whether that particular committee ought to be created as well.
I believe that's a good point, Commissioner Serban. Thank you. Is there any discussion first on the motion, the current motion that's on the floor? And if any other commissioners opposed to that idea, that if there are other potential ad hoc committees that you have a strong desire to form based on the feedback, I guess, in this case, the budget development and oversight review you have at least 3 commissioners on here expressed interest, for example. With interest of time and efficiency, I just want to make sure that there's a million different ad hocs we can form today, but I just want to make sure. Commissioner Hanson.
I think we've already voted on that. We haven't eliminated the possibility of any of those other topics. But what we've already agreed to is that we will start with the two that are the most pressing. So I don't think we've eliminated anything, but I don't think this is really relevant at this point.
Okay, thank you, Commissioner Hanson. Is there any, so the motion on the floor is to approve the two ad hoc committees right now as they're composed. And I just want to present this idea for future meetings. If there are other ad hocs that come up in the future, that would be considered. But for the purposes of today's meeting, I would like to kind of just focus our discussion on these two. So yes, Commissioner Inman.
Well, I mean, we're going to vote on the motion on the floor, but that doesn't preclude us from entering another motion on ad hoc committees after this motion is voted on, I believe. And so maybe that's when you could entertain the idea that maybe there's some others. So just a thought, because I don't think we're precluding forming anything else today by voting on the current motion.
No, we're not. And again, after we approve these, we can approve other ad hocs, but I don't want to spend the whole entire meeting or the rest of the meeting looking at all the different ad hoc available. And also knowing within the interest of time and our own time too, we have other members that have just joined other ad hocs. So I just want to be just aware of exactly, there's a lot of unknowns about what work is moving forward right now with the census timeline, but at least the most pressing ones, because most pressing ones would be the outreach, I would say right now, because we need to start moving that quickly before the census data hits. So I think everyone is in agreement on that, that's a priority, but certainly this, doesn't preclude us from adopting other ad hoc committees down the line to help us better organize these projects. I mean, you could even form an ad hoc within an ad hoc if you wanted to. So it's just, I'm just planning that idea out there, but I think that this is a really great start. And this is really going to make a whole lot of sense much later as we start to get all of these trainings in order. We start to learn more about the data, the populations we're working with, and doing more outreach and defining who we are as a commission, really, and making ourselves truly independent. And so I think that is something that I just want to make sure everyone understands. Yes, Commissioner Dostal, and then we'll move to the final vote if there's no more discussion. Thank you.
No, I just wanted to say that all we're voting on here is approving the 4 people for each one. So any discussion should be about if there's any reason we don't think we should approve, I think those 4 people, which I don't think there is any objection to that. So, I think we can go ahead and vote.
Okay. Thank you. So without further discussion, we'll go to the roll call.
We have a motion, but we do need a second. We have a motion.
Oh, sorry, I thought it was did already. So, okay, so we have the amended motion on the floor with the formation of the 2 ad hoc committees. Do I hear a second?
I'll second it.
Okay, seconded by Commissioner Brown. And would you call the roll, please?
Thank you. Commissioner Russ?
Aye.
Thank you. Chair Boehm?
Aye.
Commissioner Hanson?
Aye.
Commissioner Serban?
Aye.
Commissioner Brown,
Aye.
Commissioner Larson,
Aye.
Commissioner Chen, Commissioner Garcia,
Aye.
Commissioner Pons,
Aye.
Commissioner Krugliak.
Aye.
Commissioner Inman,
Aye.
Vice Chair Diaz,
Aye.
Commissioner Katerina,
Aye.
Commissioner Dostal.
Aye.
That motion passes unanimously with all commissioners who are present voting aye.
Great. Thank you. Thank you so much for this. I'm really feeling, I don't know about you, but I'm really feeling great. Like we're actually going to be working on some stuff. So give yourselves a round of applause. First step. All right, I'm going to turn it over to Chair Bain.
Thank you very much, commissioners, and in particular, thanks to Vice Chair Diaz. I'm not just excited about where we are, I'm excited that when I look down at the little clock on my computer screen, it starts with a 4, not a 5. That's on Vice Chair Diaz and all of you for getting through a really complicated set of issues and getting us off to a great start on some real work. So thank you. Thanks to everyone, and Sonia particularly, well done. Thank you. Our final item today, item 8, prioritization of commissioner requested agenda items. You all have the list of topics compiled by staff that commissioners have suggested for consideration. Some of these items have been addressed administratively by staff outside of IRC meetings, as was the case, for instance, with implementing the random order of voting. And some of these are pending future actions, such as coordinating the details of in-person meetings, which I know we're all looking forward to. Before we begin a discussion, which I don't think will take very long, but I think is worth having, Barbara, do you have any comments you want to offer from staff?
Yes, thank you, Chair. And I just wanted to note that, as you indicated, we've been tracking the questions that come up at the IRC. Some of it's been folded into those potential ad hoc activities and duties, so that might have those come off the list then, and some have been taken care of. I do want to note that a recommendation in the information item 8 from staff is that at the February 28th IRC meeting, we look at the chair and vice chair, and this is pursuant to action from the December 10th, 2020 IRC meeting, where the interim roles of Chair Boehm and Vice Chair Diaz were indicated that it would expire at the end of this month. So for that reason, we're asking that this be included in the IRC next meeting on February 25th with the title of consideration of chair and vice chair. And then also next meeting, we are also planning to do any updates regarding the monthly budget, since we had indicated it would be monthly. It'll be a month now, so it'll be our next evening meeting, and we'll do any monthly budget updates and any information is not listed on the staff report, as well as any follow-up items from today's commission meeting. For example, anything the ad hoc committees would like to bring back. So we're thank you, and we just wanted to, if we've missed something or there's something else you'd like us to keep adding to this list, please let us know.
Thank you very much for that. Before we open up for discussion, Andrew, do we have any requests from the public to speak on this item?
Thank you. We do not have any requests to speak from the public. I'll just give a moment for any individuals that did not submit a request but would like to address the commission to raise their hand in Zoom. We're happy to acknowledge you. Chair Boehm, I do not see any hands raised, so it appears we do not have any public communication on this item.
Very good. Let me hold my additional remarks because we'll move straight into a discussion. Commissioner Pons?
Yes, I want to go back to what Chair Serban said about the Budget Development and Oversight Budget Reviews Ad Hoc Committee. I think your comment about the next budget rollout or the discussion is very critical in this ad hoc committee being stood up. I think we have time to at least make a motion that we accept that as a committee, and then get a raised show of hands on individuals that want to be on that committee. and then move forward, whether it's 2 or 6. And I think it's critical now in this process that we could do that. And that would be my recommendation.
For that, let me take Commissioner Dostal and then Commissioner Servin before I ask Commissioner Pons about that motion. But let me, since I saw those hands up first, let me call on them. Commissioner Dostal.
Well, I think at this point, we're getting monthly budget updates from the staff. So I'm not sure what the ad hoc committee would do that we can't just do, you know, in addition to what we're doing by hearing from staff on a monthly basis.
Thank you for that. Commissioner Servin.
I see that the 25th is our next meeting, and at that time we will have to consider the rotating chair leadership arrangement that we had originally arrived at on December 10th, as staff noted. And I thank you, staff, for reminding us of that. I think maybe one of the more efficient ways that we might consider tackling that item might be to create an ad hoc committee that would consider that, and then on the 25th, come to the IRC meeting on the 25th with a proposal for us to consider.
Let me offer a response to both of those because it ties into how we handle future agenda items in general. The advantage of ad hoc committees, for my mind, is that we can move them forward with sufficient guidance to do things that the commission itself either doesn't have time for or needs a more detailed look or some additional outreach. I'm already going to stop myself. Commissioner Garcia, did you want to speak first?
No, that's okay. Please.
Okay.
Go ahead.
So between that and the number of ad hoc committees we have engaged today, my suggestion, and it's only a suggestion, is not to create any more today because we have some more thinking to do about how our current assignments are going to work. And we have relatively limited time, especially if we do have an industry day on February 24th. That is not to say that either suggestion is incorrect. In fact, I place value on them at the right moment. But for example, I would love to have another budget briefing before we assign an ad hoc budget committee so we can give them a very specific tasking. Barbara mentioned, for instance, a little earlier that council costs are going to be a little higher than anticipated. I'd like to see those breakdowns first and then make an informed decision, because we may very well need to take that up as a commission topic. That's the only hesitation I have on it for creating it today, creating either one today. I want to be very, very clear about that motion or how we will discuss the chair vice chair issue, because Commissioner Servin, I think you raise a very good and possibly a well worthwhile option. But there are actually two aspects to the discussion. One is the aspect on chair vice chair. One is the aspect of, do we want a rotating system or not? The other is, who do we want, whether a rotating system or not, to be chair and vice chair? My memory, and I look back at the meeting briefly, was that we informally decided this would be an interim leadership for Vice Chair Diaz and I, because we didn't know each other yet and we didn't really know the work of our commissions yet. It is not to say that we shouldn't have a rotation or that we shouldn't have a vote for another chair to take and vice chair to take us through the entire period. It is to say there needs to be some thought given to this. And I think it's thought from all commissioners at this point, at least from my point of view. I would ask commissioners to be thinking about it along these lines, though, for February 25th. If we have a rotation, how do we ensure sufficient continuity alongside empowerment, as Kathy was mentioning? If we don't have a rotation, what are there opportunities, and we've seen some in our last meeting and today, can we exercise for leadership? Because as I've said, at least for my part from the beginning, I think any commissioner could serve as chair. It's how the commission is working and where those leadership roles emerge. And there are more than the two, whether we need to formalize or informalize any of it. So I leave you with that thought on that item, which I think will be on the agenda next time. I'll also ask you to look at that broad list that staff has generated and think about how we might want to prioritize those items and come prepared to discuss which ones might we want to discuss in our next meeting after the 25th, or whether something might wait a little while longer. I think we could have that discussion at the end of our next meeting, but we can link it to some of the ongoing training that we're having. Some of the thoughts we were provided with today made me think of some things that affect that list, and I'm sure everyone will have additional items to include. That's what I wanted to say on this. I'll turn to Vice Chair Diaz, and then I'll ask if there are still motions on the floor. Vice Chair Diaz.
Yes, thank you. I just wanted to also make note that we do have another training at this next meeting coming up on February 25th. And I'm wondering, I don't want to open up a Pandora's box here, but I just was wondering, since that was the issue of the chair and vice chair, is that, that was our own action that we took on December 10th. So we could potentially say, well, look, we still have to discuss this issue if we want to discuss it about the rotating chair. But I don't know if we could do it all in the same meeting. I'm thinking if we should have that discussion first and then, vote on the chair, vice chair on the later date, on the next, I guess that would be the first week of March. I'm not sure I'm just putting that idea on the table because it is an interesting one. It was mentioned before in our presentation today. So not sure what other commissioners think about that, but I would love to put at least some of these potential agenda items, at least one on the next meeting, but keeping the agenda short and concise like we did today. So that's all I wanted to say or propose.
Thank you. Commissioner Garcia?
Yes, I'm wondering if it might be helpful for us to get the information about the California Redistricting Commission, the statewide Redistricting Commission, and their, the structure of their rotating chairmanship. For me, at least, I would like to sort of understand how it is that they're employing that method. And I don't know if that would be useful for everybody else. In terms of the Budget and Oversight Committee, I think that we will need that subcommittee at some point, but I tend to think I'm leaning towards thinking that maybe we could put that off for a little bit. I'm not sure that there's anything specific that subcommittee could be charged to do in the interim beyond what we're already getting as a commission-wide, in terms of the updates that we're getting from staff.
Thank you for that. I have Commissioner Serban. Vice Chair Diaz, did you want to weigh in? Okay, so Commissioner Serban, anyone else before we come to a closure? I promise to come back to the two commissioners with motions. Okay, so Commissioner Serban, then Commissioner Henson. Please, Commissioner Serban.
So if the chair vice chair matter will be placed as an action item on the upcoming 25th agenda, do we want to request or at least find out more information on at least maybe from staff how the CRC structured their rotating leadership and then maybe model our structure after that?
Well, I think we might want to cast it a little broader, but
exactly.
Yeah, let me propose something and see if it makes sense. And I don't think we need a motion or a vote on it per se, but Barbara, could we make sure that the training on the 25th includes a good look at chair and vice chair arrangements, including by the state commission and including by some of the studies that have been done on how they work, what the advantages are. We heard some of it today, what the questions are. I think we have to have, Commissioner Serban, an action item because under our previous motion, the current chair and vice chair terms expire. But that motion may be as simple as we're going to extend them one more meeting and then we'll go from there. So if everyone's comfortable with that, that may save us some time. That'll kind of be the default going in. And maybe the only action will be, will we need to commit to create an ad hoc committee to take a deeper look at it? And that, I think, will depend on the training and what kind of questions commissioners have. Does that sound like a reasonable approach to everyone? I'm seeing a lot of nodding.
And Chair
Good.
Bain, to confirm, we've done some initial research. We're happy to present that at the next meeting. And you are correct. The motion could be to extend it for another month or 2 months while you do the rest of the information gathering and ad hoc work.
Good. All right, Commissioner Hanson. Mute. I'm sorry.
Sorry. I don't know if this is appropriate at this point in the agenda, but I just have a couple of process questions that I want to ask. And the first is, how do these ad hoc committees formulate? The last time when we had our commission to, our subcommittee to, no, our ad hoc committee, one of our members stepped up and offered to create a Zoom conversation with all of us, and that's how it happened. But is that what we hope will happen forever? And then the other question I have is, what is our responsibility for the industry day, which is going to occur before our next meeting? And I don't know what I can do to help.
And as part of that, I will ask staff that at this point, if it happens, would simply be an industry day hosted by the county and not a special meeting of the IRC that would require all commissioners to attend.
Correct. It would not be, it will be handled by staff and the Department of Purchasing and Contract in terms of notifying everyone and getting the word out.
So will we be among those who are notified then?
Yes, absolutely.
And all commissioners could join if they were so inclined. Yes. Very good. Let me step back then and ask if you can address any of the other concerns Commissioner Hanson had.
Yes, so regarding the question on the ad hoc, since it's staff is not part of the ad hoc, we are here to support you in any way you need. So if you needed a Zoom account or if you needed us, to run something by council, whatever that is, we're here to support you. But the ad hoc committee functions in terms of identifying when they meet, how they communicate, and what support they might need.
Okay.
So Commissioner, I think the first, I'm sorry. I think the first step will be for each ad hoc committee, but I want to make sure it's agreeable to commissioners. They can get in touch with each other by their county email addresses and kind of go from there. They don't have particular rules they have to follow. So they can have a conference call to get started. They could have an email to get started and figure out whether they need a Zoom call or something more ambitious.
And if I may add, Chair, we will send out those documents that we promised to send out to the group. So you have, everyone has your email from that, the ad hoc, and then that way you're able to proceed with discussions.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. So before we move on, let me just check one more time. Commissioner Pons, Commissioner Serban, are we okay? Do we need to address a motion?
We do not. I'm in concurrence with the rest of the commission.
Thank you for that, but thank you for raising it. It's important. Commissioner Serban?
I think we're good. I forget what the point of contention was.
I was just
whatever it is, I'm happy to walk away from it.
Yeah, whether we needed to do anything today to create ad hocs or take other action on chair, vice chair.
No, it sounds like we're prepared to address the matter at our next meeting.
Very good. All right. Any further discussion on that item? Very good. We move on to agenda item 9, adjournment. Noting that the time is 4:35, this meeting is now adjourned. Our next meeting is Thursday, February 25th at 5:30 and will be held virtually. All commissioners are kindly invited to attend Industry Day, which I'm sure we'll hear about by email. Thank you again for your participation. Have a great afternoon and a great weekend. Take care.
Thanks, everyone. Thank you to the public for attending.
Wonderful job. Thank you.
everyone.
Thank you.